recording prompt. Okay. Hey everyone. So my name is Professor Kalsee. This is Divination Academy, and this is the second class in my new series on Ascended Masters. And we are going to be covering Mary Magdalene today. There is a lot to her, to be very, very, very brutally honest. That study guide, I had to really, really refrain myself, and I had to stop myself very frequently to not keep going. There's a lot to her. If you only know her from the biblical sense and from the King James biblical sense as well, because there are about at least 10 solid different versions of her in the Bible alone. And then there's so many alternate histories to her. There's ways to work with her as an ascended master with the 7 rays of light. There's ways to work with her as an ascended master for a lot of things like healing and really standing in your own power. And there's just a lot of stuff about her. So I personally do work with her. She is newer for me. I've only really I read a couple of the first books about her about 6 years ago. And I was intrigued with the idea of the divine feminine that can be attached to her from, a Christian standpoint. And I could see how from Christianity they were trying to find some way to pull that in. And so I got really intrigued with her in that aspect. But then about a year ago, I started looking at a lot of the different histories of her, a lot of the different theories that there are of who she actually was, what she actually meant, what she was actually teaching. And it really helped me to break down and deconstruct Christianity as well, which is something that we're going to talk about today. Because if you haven't been with me before and you're watching the recording, because I know everybody here has been with me before, I consider myself a mystic. So even though I'm a pagan, I do wholeheartedly believe that there is truth in Christianity. There is truth in that religion, and we do need to look and pull those pieces of threads out. And we do that by deconstructing it and looking at every single possible angle and meaning and what was manipulated, what was changed, the actual history and anthropology of things. And there's so much that goes on to this that you can wrap Mary Magdalene into an ascended master and paganism and in any part of your path. I'm going to talk about it later, but there's even a lot of there's some solid documentation, there's some solid stories, and some solid theories about her, of her actually studying at the schools of mysteries in Egypt. And her coming from an actually very, very important, noble line in Egypt. So she would have access to a lot of the mysticism and stuff that paganism is all about. When you look at different interpretations of the Bible as well, because there isn't just what most people know, the King James Version. There's the Gnostic text. There are hundreds of versions of that text. You can pull out the paganism aspects of it as well. Because as we all know, because I've talked about in other classes, I'm never going to gloss over the fact of how Christianity has warped and changed and everything that has done that has been brutally wrong and not okay. But we do have to pull out the parts of truth that we can and the parts of the paganism that was preserved within it. So that's also a huge reason why I work with her, because of that. Because there are parts of paganism that the church couldn't get rid of that is still alive within that today, and those truths still matter. And I feel like it's just so important to really work on that and be willing to deconstruct that and look at that. So before we get going, does anybody have any questions, any comments, anything at all? Do you know anything about Mary Magdalene other, even if it's just the King James version of her in the Bible? And I'm gonna, you're gonna hear that so often because that is a very specific version of the Bible, and that's what most people know of the Bible. It's not the original one, so you're gonna hear that terms a lot. So if you need any questions or breakdowns on that too, please just ask. So right now I'm gonna let you guys have the floor because this might, if this is something you might know something about. If you guys have any questions, any comments, go for it. If not, then I will jump into my study guide. Like I said, I had to really refrain myself on this one because there's a lot to her. A lot to her. Go ahead, honey.
I don't know a lot about saints or that or other folks, but in this context, but is she the one who hears God, like his voice or something, and was locked away for a time, or is that someone else?
That's someone else. So I will go over the biblical story of who she was. So Mary Magdalene, she's the one that 3 key events about her in the Bible that never changed and are the same across the four. There's details that are a little bit different across the four Gospels, but she's present in all of them. One is there's a story of Egypt, Jesus coming across her, and he casts out and exorcises 7 demons from her, and everybody knows her as like the town prostitute and the town harlot, and that's how they paint her. I completely disagree with that, and I'm going to talk about that later. But that is how that's one story. That's how you'll see her. That's usually the first time that she pops up. How most people know her is that story. The next, she is the woman that is crying at Jesus' feet at the crucifixion. That is the woman who is there. She is also the one who is anointing him after his death, if you believe he actually died. That's a whole other thing. So she's the one that is there in the tomb anointing him before the stone is rolled away, and he's kept there for 3 days. And then she is also known as the first apostle. She is known as the first disciple, because she is the one that is the only person, like she's the one who was there when he rose. She was the one that was there when the rock was rolled away and he rose from the dead 3 days later. She was the one that went and ran and told the disciples that he had come back. She was the one that spread the news first. She was that first messenger. So from the biblical standpoint in the King James Version, like that's how most people know her. That's who she is. Does that answer that?
Yes, thank you.
It's fabulous. And I'll go over it in a little bit more detail too, because like I said, there's a couple different versions, and Peter has he's a interesting individual, and he does not like her. He's very, very, very envious of her. Okay, so any other questions or comments or anything before we get going? I saw you unmute yourself, honey.
I was going to ask the side question that if I gave enough information, that you could tell me who I was trying to think of, because I cannot think of it.
Okay. Who?
Huh?
I was gonna say who. Like, give me the information. I can try to think of who it is.
Oh, I don't. I remember she was locked away, and she was like a nun or something. And she was locked away, and she heard the voice of God.
That is another one of the Marys. So there's actually about 7 Marys that are actually in the Bible of significance.
Okay.
So she is another one of them, and there's theories that she's possibly one of the 3 that are in the story of the 3 Marys, which is actually what happened to Mary Magdalene after Jesus died and how she ended up in France and as like the main apostle spreading his message. So there's theories that that's one of the Marys that is there in there too. It's really confusing to separate them all because each gospel tells it a little bit differently, of a little bit of different details, and then there's 2 gospels that leave them unnamed as unnamed women, and then they just say what happens to them. So that's why I say like it's a theory that that's who that was.
Okay. What's the other 2 Mary's names?
So there's Mary of Bethany, there's Mary of Bethsaida, there's also we have Mary Magdalene, which is Mary Magdala, which is a lot of times how you'll see her reference because she's from the Magdala, that's where she's from. There's one from Gaul, and then there's also Sarah, which is sometimes referenced as just Mary. And then there's Mother Mary, which is obviously his mother. There's a lot of Marys.
That seems highly confusing.
It is very confusing. That's why sometimes there's some people that theorize that they're all just 2 or 3 main Marys, and it's just because I'm going to get down to the timeline of when the Gospels are written too, because each one's written at a little bit different time, and the first one's it's written 65 years after all that time frame, so it's all based off of memory, which is another reason why the names are sometimes confusing and they're left unnamed, and there's different details, and yes. Yeah, yes. Does that answer it for now?
It does. Thank you.
And then I guess I kind of want to make a disclaimer here quick before we get any further, because I know some people are probably going to see this and they're going to see Mary Magdalene and see, on YouTube and see the recording, and there might be some Christian witches, and that's a whole other topic I will get into at some other time. thinking that I'm going to be teaching this a certain way, or that I don't know what I'm talking about either, and that I'm just a pagan that's just talking about Christianity and I've got this warped view of it. I want to make the disclaimer right now that I have very extensively studied this religion. I was a missionary. This religion I was very deeply into. I'm not just some witch and pagan who's been practicing paganism my whole life and I have a biased opinion of this religion. I have deeply studied. I have been deeply entrenched into this. I used to fight for their rights, and I actually started a lot of movements here that got them some rights in schools in my region. So I just want to put that disclaimer here as well before we get going. Especially with the accordions, because I feel like this is going to be an issue. I am very well versed in this. So if you want to come in and challenge me on like verses or anything and try to look at my interpretations and all the different texts that I have, I will gladly openly accept that, because I just want to put, again, this disclaimer just feels really important because this is a pagan academy and I'm a pagan professor, and I know that this is going to come up, but again, I am actually very well versed in this. So let's get going. Let's jump into Mary Magdalene and all there is about her. And we will get going after the disclaimer here. So, like I've touched on who she is biblically a little bit, and I'm going to get into a lot more detail about that. When we look at her kind of how she is modernly and look at her as an ascended master, she's coming in as a goddess archetype, and I don't work with archetypes a lot, but I always teach it, if you choose to work with archetype energy, because I do at times, she's coming in as a very, 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 like, very divine feminine goddess archetype that's all about the embodiment of the balance and duality of humanity, compassion, love, and a lot of times it's also faith. Faith is very much tied to her because of her journey with Jesus. I mean, she's said to be the only like disciple and apostle that literally always traveled with him everywhere he was. Like she was there from the moment like he excised those 7 demons from her. And if that story happened or not, like that, like those two, like they were always together. Like she always was with him, and she traveled with him. So like she was very faithful to him. She was at the feet of of the cross when he was dying. Like she did not run or shy away. She waited and waited, knowing that he was going to be coming back. She did her duty and she spread the message after he died. So she's really seen as like this very like strong, faithful, very like, I'm going to stand for what I believe and teach what I know is right, and that is what I'm going to do. And that's a huge reason why I connect to her too. Like, and that's why her energy is very, very magnetic, and it's very powerful when you really, really deconstruct her and look at who she is. And even if you look at her in that very, Catholic saint, because she did get raised to sainthood, by the way, and there's a cult to her as well. We'll talk about that later. But so she is that is the energy that you're seeing with her. That is really what she's starting to represent. Now, who she was historically, she was an actual historical woman. Like we can trace her, like we can trace her in history, just like we can physically place Jesus in history, like we can trace her physically in history. And she is a woman who is from Migdalal, which is a small Galilean town. It was known for fishing. It was a fishing port. And she is, like I said, she's considered a female disciple. She's considered the apostle of apostles. She's considered one of the first apostles. Peter will argue with you, and the Catholic Church will argue with you, but that's a whole other thing. But like that is like she was the first one to see him risen from the cross, which is crucial to that, if that's what you believe happened, and I will talk about that later. There's quite a few different stories about that as well. She then is also painted as a sex worker. She's labeled as a saint. She's labeled as a sinner. She's labeled as the witness, the apostle. She's labeled as Jesus's wife. I'm going to talk about that as well, which, by the way, anybody who wants to argue with me on that, like, I will come tooth and nail with you on that one, because it culturally, anthropology makes perfect sense for Jesus to have a wife. It makes no sense for him not to. But I'm going to talk about that more later. So she's been referenced as that in a couple different ways. The Da Vinci Code, that was brought up then. There's been a whole entire movie about it now that's all titled Mary Magdalene that's talked about that. There's plenty of books. There's documents. I'm going to go over the documents. there's a lot when it comes to her. She's had a lot of titles. She's changed a lot throughout history, which is why I also feel like she's so important because she can't like no matter how hard the Catholic Church has tried to vilify her, she has gone nowhere. And every time like they get close, like she just ignites in a completely different way. Especially recently in the last 3 to 4 years, 5 actually, I would even say there's a lot of like schools and temples that are really teaching sacred arts and sacred rites that are all about attaching to her specifically, especially with the 7 rays of light as an ascended master. And I'm going to talk about that later too. She first gets labeled a prostitute by a pope, by the way, Pope Gregory the First. He pronounced her to be a super sinful woman in the year 591, which just doesn't make any sense when it comes to the Gospels at that point, when it comes on how they were written at that point. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later more in detail. But that's actually why she ends up becoming labeled a prostitute. She wasn't labeled that until Pope Gregory the First pronounced her that, and then the King James Version of the Bible and all of that. So she was seen and treasured, and she was really highly regarded prior to that. Prior to that, like she was very deeply regarded. She spread the message of Christianity more than any other disciple. And I apologize. And then when you talk about her too, and I've hinted about this before, she's also so important, even if you look at it just from a biblical standpoint, if you don't look at her historically or all the other options I'm going to talk to you as well. She's present in every single one of the gospels. They couldn't write her out no matter how hard they tried. They put her in there as little as they possibly could. Like they totally cut her down because there's an entire gospel that is all about her. It's called the Gospel of Mary. I actually have the entire text in the study guide for you, so you'll be able to read that word for word from the text. I also have the interpretations that most scholars agree with what they mean because some of the holes had to be filled in because we don't actually have the entire text. It's either been purposely destroyed or just through the fact of time. There are bits and pieces, so some of it has to be inferred, but I do have that in here. We're going to talk about that later as well. But she wasn't always revered like as that prostitute. She wasn't revered as a single woman. She's a simple woman. She was very, very much treasured. She was seen as the idea of women's equality, and that they shouldn't be valued or dejected. And then she was seen, like I said, she was seen as very faithful, very loving. She was seen as the one that really spread his teachings and spread his message. So she was incredibly important. It's really only the Western Church, which is when the Roman Catholic Church gets involved, like I said, that she's seen that way. Even today, it's really only the Western Church that views her as this sinful prostitute. They even pray to her in a saint as if she is a simple prostitute. It's actually quite insulting, but that is how the Western Church sees her. The Eastern Church has always honored her as an apostle. They have honored her as literally the one that sent the message, the one that brought the good news, like for them and within their souls and their religion. And so like they especially because of what's also in the Gospel of John, which by the way, that's one of the removed Bibles. If you didn't know, there's quite a bit of books from the Bible have been removed. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail too. There's quite a bit. I have read every single one but 2. I'm still working on getting 2 on my hands. In my hands. Philip is 1. I'm having a really hard time. There's the book of Philip that I'm having a really hard time tracking down. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. So I just got done with the overview. I'm going to jump into the chat, see if you guys have any questions, and then we're going to go over the biblical version of her a little bit more in detail. I did a pretty decent job earlier in that overview of answering Honey's question, but I'll go over the biblical version of her, the King James biblical version of her, and then we're going to get into the fun stuff, the Gnostic text, the Gnostic history of her, and then we will go to a bunch of other stuff. And then we'll get to how to work with her. So let me jump in, see if you guys have any questions from the overview. So I don't know what the proper wording would be, but okay. It's gonna depend, Morgan, on how my energy level feels when we get there. And if not, what I'm going to do is if I don't have the energy level, I'm probably just going to do in our private community group, because that Facebook Live works for me no matter what. I'm probably just going to do a live one there to where you guys can be there, or we'll do it in my study group. It depends on my energy level, because my energy level is a little low right now, and I don't want to try to call something in and not feel fully grounded. So if my energy level is there, then yes, I will definitely try to do that and like introduce you to her. If not, then like I said, I will do a Facebook Live or some other type of way in the next week so that you guys can do that. Because I want you guys for sure to feel the difference of the feeling of energy with an ascended master versus a deity. It is a different type of energy. It is a different type of energy that you're tapping into. It's a different source. So I do want you guys to be able to feel that. But I also want, like I said, I just want to make sure my energy is 100% aligned for me to do that. So Marty, the Holy Grail is not an object. So that's one theory of what the Holy Grail is. There's a lot of different theories of what the Holy Grail is. There's quite a few theories that the Holy Grail is an object, and there's called multiple different versions of what that object could be. And one is that it actually has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus, and it actually has to do with John the Baptist, because John the Baptist was Jesus's teacher, so really they were worshiping the student and not the master. So that's one version. Another version, which I talk about in the study guide way later, is that yes, this version that Jesus and Mary Magdalene, they had two children. There's arguments about that. Some people say one and it was only a daughter. But most of the texts that I've looked at, two seems to be the common one. It's a son and a daughter. And there's actually a family in London that claims that they have entire histories all the way back to Sumer to validate that. And I've looked through it. It's pretty interesting. But yes, that is one theory of what the Holy Grail is. Another theory is that the Holy Grail is actually Mary Magdalene herself, because she is his most prized and loved and beloved student, and because she was the one that fully actually understood his teachings, that she was the one that was actually able to become the Holy Grail, because the Holy Grail in some cases is actually a process, and to some it's just a process of enlightening and awakening to some. And so yes, there's a lot of theories. So there's also theories that she was the Holy Grail because she was the one, and she was the representation of the divine feminine, and she's the one that completed him to allow him to be able to fully be balanced and live in an actual complete human existence, to then be able to accomplish what he needed to do for humanity in that sense. So there's a lot of I could do a whole class on the Holy Grail alone, to be honest. But yes, this is a super common theory, because there's a theory that he's married to her, and I'm going to go over that later. Okay, I didn't see any hands go up. I didn't see any questions. Oh, nope, honey, I just saw a hand go up. I missed it. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was waiting until the end so I didn't interrupt others.
You're good.
In case they want to talk. The Holy Grail bonus class. That sounds like that sounds fun.
That's just the biblical version of the Holy Grail, guys.
Oh.
I could go on for days on that topic. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
You're good. Can you go over what books there are that are missing from the Bible? I know Enoch is one of them, and said Philip.
Yes, I
What's
can
the
get you
others?
the entire list. I think I might have put it in the study guide. If I didn't, I'll get you the entire list.
Awesome.
I might have it all memorized. I might not. There's a lot of information in my brain. So there's Philip, there's John, there's Mary, there's Enoch. There is also the gospel of, there's a separate gospel just for Jesus. There's a gospel for Noah. And then there's two that I know that are unnamed. So one of those I haven't gotten my hands on. And then let me pull up my file folder of these, because I can pull up give me 1 second. Let me go into my Google Drive. Hold on, it's pulling up for me. Okay, so we have the Gospel of Thomas, which how can I forget that one? That's super interesting. The Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip. There's the Gospel of the Truth. There's the Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, which is also known as the Egyptian Gospel. There's the Secret Book of John, the Secret Book of James. Then there's the Book of Thomas, which is different than the Gospel of Thomas. They actually are very different. They read very differently. There's the Dialogue of the Savior, the Second Discourse of Great Seth, the Book of Barak, and then the Round Dance of the Cross. Let's see if I can copy and paste from the table of contents and it not look really funky in the chat. There you go.
Beautiful.
That's everything that's
Thank
missing
you.
from the Bible. There's also the Book of Enoch too, and then there's one for Noah, which is technically the Book of Enoch in some cases, but there's two different versions that I've come across, and there actually are key differences in the story. But yes, there's the Book of Enoch too, which most people know that one because of Ancient Aliens. Okay, any other questions? And personally, I feel like there's even more that I'm not aware of that are missing from the book. I think that there's more that only the Vatican knows about. But that's a whole other, that's the history of the Vatican. I could go on for a while too. Okay,
One
let's
more
go
question.
back. Oh, did you have a question, honey?
Yeah, sorry, just real quick.
Yeah.
You said the if you don't do the meet and greet, so to speak, today, you'll do a Facebook Live.
Yeah.
Can we not be can we go back and watch that and still like feel her presence in that from that if
I think so,
from like
because
later
there's
on?
times to where I go to recordings and I still feel the circle and everything, and I still feel everything that's going on. I mean, Alex watches my classes where I do that on YouTube. Like she watches them and she's never said that, she hasn't felt it or experienced it. So I think it's also going to depend on like your energy and your intention as well. So that's going to be up to you. Otherwise I can literally, yeah, if you're not going to, I can try to make sure that I do it during a class time too, if I'm not feeling fully ready to do it at the end.
No, it's okay. I just didn't know if that was possible, like a rewatching it later on and still feeling everything that should be felt. I was just checking for that.
Yeah, I think it is. I always do. But like I said, it may be different from practitioner to practitioner too. But yeah, because if you've ever been to like a moon ceremony and it was, pre-recorded, a lot of them do it pre-recorded now. So or like go to like any of that. Usually you feel it. But if you don't, then you can send me a DM and we can talk about it. And I can certainly do it one-on-one with you too.
Okay, that's actually really awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't have a problem doing that. As like I said, as long as my energy's right, I have no problem like calling things in. It's just my energy's got to be right. But yeah, and I can do stuff one-on-one as long as we can schedule a time. I have no problem with that. Okay, let's jump back in here. So, different names that you'll hear from her and you'll see from her, especially from a biblical standpoint, is you're going to see Mary Magdalene. You're going to see it with the E at the end and without the E at the end, so just with the N. You'll also see it sometimes Mary Magdala, Mary Magdalena, Mary Magdalene, and Mary Magdala. So you'll see quite a few different versions of her. Also in the Bible, you will sometimes see her just not named at all. She's referenced as just they reference her as the woman who has a bad reputation, or the woman that nobody wants to be around, or the sinful woman that needs to repent. A lot of times if you see that, they're typically referencing to her as well in those versions. Like I've talked about before, when it comes to a biblical standpoint, she's in all four of the canonical gospels, the main gospels that matter: Matthew, Mark, Luke. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. She's in all four of them. She's there. She's written in. They could not write her out. The three main places that you see her, like I've talked about, I apologize, is going to be the story where he casts out 7 demons out of her. I believe it's in Luke chapter 8 where that story pops up. you'll see it in every single one, but for sure there, if I remember correctly. He cast 7 demons out of her. She is claimed to be, she's apparently possessed, and when he did that, he was told to shun her and to go away from her and to rebuke her, even though that he healed her. But this is actually a story where you see like that first sense of he doesn't treat women any worse than anybody else. He treats women with respect and dignity. He loves them for who they are. And you start to see like the building of that affection between the two of them. And because he doesn't shun her away, he doesn't shy her away. He literally picks her up and tells her, like, no, you are loved. Like, you are healed because you are loved. Like, you are so deeply loved. Like, that is why, like, you will be healed, and you don't need to shy away from me. Um, I'm paraphrasing this, obviously. I'm not saying the exact verse of the Bible right now. But that is how he reacts to her. And then from then on, you see her traveling with him. There is, I mean, she's there at the miracle, with the wedding with the bread, where he turns, where he creates, water into wine, where he turns water into wine, at that wedding, like that wedding, the wedding for John, like she's painted there. There's actually a couple of theories though that that wedding actually was for the two of them and not for John. There's actually some theories that she might have actually been the one who married John. So you see her there. So you see her popping up throughout the text. You see her popping up biblically throughout the text. She's in those verses. She's in those stories. You don't see her quite so much then for a little while until it comes to the Last Supper. She is there. She is written in at the Last Supper. And that she is, most of the verses don't name her, most of the gospels don't name her by name. They name her as an unnamed woman, the one who should be scorned, and she was simply there like pouring water. But they do notate that she's there. Like every single version notates that she's there. And one of them, she's just the woman carrying the alabaster white jar. What that is and what it, we don't know. But she is at the Last Supper. She's written in the Last Supper at all four of the Gospels. She's there. She's referenced. Another passage where you're gonna see her as well, is gonna pop up if you look into Mark 16. You're gonna be starting to look at the crucifixion. And she's there. Like she's there at the crucifixion. She's written that she's one, like her name in most of them is mentioned, to where she's the one she's at his feet. And that she's literally at his feet, sobbing and weeping and crying, and she will not leave. Even when others have left, she will not leave. And it's written like that in all the texts, not quite so intensely, not quite so dramatically, but it is written there. And then she is written in the text as well as being the one that actually, in some texts, she's the only one. And in some of the gospels, she's the only one that's there anointing him when it comes to getting ready for his resurrection, and Jesus getting ready for his resurrection. And so, and the two of them, I believe in Luke, Luke and John. In Luke and John, John is also there as well. And because he actually goes up to Pontius Pilate and he begs for Jesus's body to be taken down so that they can go and perform the burial and all of that, and they can go do all the Jewish rites. He can be put in he can be anointed and put in a shroud and placed in the cavern and all of that. So there are two different versions there, but she is there. No, she's the consistency, that she's the one there. She's anointing him. It is said that she grabbed, there's theory that she grabbed actually like some of his blood into a cup to carry with her, and that's for the covenant being carried forward. And that's also thought to be possibly the Holy Grail, that cup that she actually gathered his blood in when she was anointing him. But she was the one that like literally prepared his body. Again, this is from the biblical standpoint. I'm going to talk about later. There's quite a few different versions of what may have actually happened here, that have to do with her, which is why I'm going to be talking about it, not just because of the whole Christianity and Jesus, but because it has to do with her. And as I teach with every single entity that you access and you go to, you need to know the history, you need to know the stories, you need to know who they are, and you need to know them from as many aspects and angles that you possibly can. So that's also why we're going over all of this. But so she shows up there, she's the one anointing him, and then in every single one, there's no argument. In every single one, she is the one he appears to. She is the one that he rises, is resurrected from, rises from the dead. She is the one that sees him. She is the one that is there. There are the book of John states that John was possibly there as well, but I don't know how I feel about that part, but I will put that side note there. But Mary is the one that is there. She's the first one, and she knew he was going to be there. It talks about how joyful he was to see her, how joyful she was to see him, and that she is the one that he sends to go get his disciples. She's the one that she's like, with why aren't they here? Like, go and spread the news of like I rose, and she like did not have the doubt about it. And then it was also said in the very back part, you will also see her in almost every single book that he speaks directly to her to go and spread his teachings after he has spoken to the disciples. So he literally, in almost every single text, he's turning directly to her and telling her, you need to go and spread my teachings. You need to go and spread my teachings. There's also in most of them a point where even Peter looks over at her and asks her, you need to teach us the teachings because you are the only one that fully understands them. So she this is biblically this can't be argued with. It's in the text, like it is biblically in the text. Like this is what happens in the New Testaments. This is from the King James version as well. So this is the edited down version. This is so edited down, guys, and this is how important she was. This is the energy that you're seeing. The absolutely faithful, the absolutely she was there, like she knew what she believed in and she stood with it. And that's where she was. Like she cared deeply about what she was learning. She cared deeply about this man, and she was going to do what she needed to do to make sure that came to fruition. And she was there through it all, no matter what anybody said of her, no matter how many times they called her a prostitute, no matter how many times they told her she was sinful, no matter how many times they told her she didn't deserve any of it, she stood her ground. I was like, I'm not going anywhere. So from a biblical standpoint, like even when you look at all of this, like it's edited down, like she's so important. She's so without her, literally Christianity would have gone nowhere. It literally would have gone nowhere without her. If she would not have been there, it never would have gone anywhere. It's another reason also why I feel like it's good to know about her, because she is that crucial. Like she's that crucial to this religious movement that did so much to the planet and so much to humanity. So that's another reason again why I'm teaching this, because she is so important. Without her, truly none of that would happen. Okay, I'm going to jump into the chat, see if you guys have any questions. Because I have it broken down in way more detail in the study guide where you guys can look at like all the different versions, all the different actual verses, where you can go and find this. To look at it yourself. But I've broken down, paraphrased it, tried to show you all the different places where there's differences and point out where you're going to see it and all the different versions that she's in. That's literally just 4 books of the Bible that she's that crucial in. And then I'll jump in the chat, see if you guys have any questions. We'll talk about how they kind of turned her into a saint, how they started to vilify her, and then we'll get into the Gnostic text of her, which is crazy interesting. It is so interesting. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Any questions or feedback at all, either too? Because this is an interesting topic. So, okay, I'm going to jump back in then. Okay, so they kind of turned her into a saint way later on because they couldn't ignore her really anymore, because there's the cult of Mary, and because she was a saint previously, because of how important she becomes to France, because there are very solid documentations and very solid evidence that she physically ended up in France. And she is greatly venerated there. It's actually said that her bones, one of the possible locations for her remains is there. And that is actually the region where she went to preach and spread Christianity, is actually in Provence in France. And that is where like that message actually truly flourished, and where it was preached and spread and taught from her is actually in France. And because this is such a big deal, and because France, it is they venerate her very deeply. It is very part of their culture. It's everywhere. Like in the story, I'm going to tell the story a lot more in detail later when we talk about it. But because of this, the Catholic Church really couldn't ignore her anymore, and they needed to start to understand that they couldn't ignore the divine feminine anymore. So they elevated her to sainthood at this point. And they did this because a saint in Catholicism is so confusing. I could do a whole other thing on this too. Because they really just look at them as like friends, almost like I'm talking about them with ascended masters, and that you can go to them to speak and connect with the universe and give them the universal heart's desires, and they can help you seek meaning and outside of Jesus and God. They're more of friends. They're not put up on the divinity untouchable kind of level. This the best way to kind of explain that. It's without going down a whole rabbit hole. And because she was excised and freed from her 7 demons, and was so faithful and so repentant, and they have this whole story that they were able to vilify her with, they thought it was a great idea that we could actually, show that you can go up to sainthood and make sure that the divine feminine still understands that it had to be put in its place first before we can actually venerate and honor you. So they did that after vilifying her, because they vilified her as a prostitute from, like I said, Pope Gregory the First. And they really, really, really vilified her, because they needed to tap down the divine feminine. People can argue with me all they want. They can try to say that it's for any other reason, but there's no other explanation for this. It makes no sense other than the fact that it was trying to control women. It was trying to tamp out the divine feminine. It was trying to rise divine masculine to an unhealthy, unbalanced point for the universe and humanity as a whole. And they did this actually at an official council, by the way, if you didn't know this. And there was an actual official council and like meeting, and this whole thing is called the Council of Nicaea of 325, and it was literally 318 different Christian bishops and priests and acolytes and all these different people, some noblemen too, and obviously royalty, but they literally like came together and they made a decision of what were we going to do with Mary? What were we going to make her look like, Mother Mary? What were we going to make Mother Mary Magdalene look like? What books of the Bible were we going to allow the public to have access to? How were we going to tell the story? This happened, and then the King James Version Bible was written, which is what everybody knows now today. That's the most common version people know. Some people know the New English, the New International Version, which is translated directly from the King James Version. But like literally, it became this thing because Mary Magdalene had become so big and so important. Women wanted power in the church. They wanted to start becoming priests. They wanted to have that. They wanted to be able to teach. And they were literally just told no. They were rejected by the Catholic Church. They were rejected by Rome. They didn't want that. So then this council happened, and all this happened with her. And then we get to more modern times, and it never went away. Like France, Portugal, Spain, Argentina. There are huge areas of the world where Mary Magdalene, like she has always been venerated because she's so important. There's theories of cults for her in Egypt even, and in that area, because of her possibly being attached to the schools of mysteries there, and because of her family possibly being attached to there. So there's just like so much with her that's gone through and been changed. And again, I'm going to stand on the fact that like it is literally solely because they wanted to shut down the divine feminine. People can try to argue with me and say that people are just trying to make her bigger, but I'm going to stand on that. Like there's no other reason for it besides to try to shut down the divine feminine, to try to build up, to try to shut down any type of matriarchal power. So that's all of her when you look at her Catholicism today, throughout history, when you look at her biblically, when you look at her that from that standpoint. Now we have Mary Magdalene and Gnosticism, and in the Gnostic text. And Gnostic really just means like not included, and it also has to do with the theory and the study of gnosis, which I'm not going to get into this crazy detail about Gnosticism right now, because this is actually going to get covered either by me or Alex or both of us when we start some new stuff about different types of magic and different types of practices and things like that, so that you guys can get a really detailed look at the belief systems. But she is central to Gnosticism. She's a super towering figure. And it comes from the Nahambi text, which is actually folklore for the Cathars. If you don't know who the Cathars are in history, I highly suggest looking them up. The Cathars were pretty impressive people. We're still learning a lot about them. They've changed a lot when it actually comes to archaeology and anthropology in the last decade. But they're pretty important people. But they were actually considered to be like the founders of modern theology and of the Gnostic churches, and of said to be the keepers of the original holders of the original teachings of Christianity. And they are said to be the keepers of the true teachings of Christ. And it's actually so intriguing. Yeah, sorry, I could go on a whole thing about this. But okay, so when it comes to Mary Gnostics, the Gnosticism, the Gnostic Gospels, so she is actually super important, and the reason why she's so important and such an enigmatic figure, because in the Gnostic Gospel dialogue of the Savior, which is actually like a lot of teaching straight from Jesus and straight from the Savior Messiah, and he actually wholeheartedly proclaims and references her as the woman who actually completely understood, who actually fully understood the message he was coming to teach, and had actually gained knowledge to the knowledge that he was trying to spread, that she had actually fully been able to accomplish that, and that she was actually the only one who had done so. And he references it many times, actually. And they talk about the fact that she had gnosis and that she is gnosis and that she displayed gnosis. And it's displayed in the Gospel of Mary. And what gnosis really is it is, best way to explain this without going, it is really, it is complete, full understanding of the universe, your place in it, knowledge, every divine act, like everything. Like it is literally the full understanding and comprehension of everything. It is the full, when you look at it from a Christos perspective, it is getting the full access to everything that the human body and human soul has to offer you, and all that information and knowledge that is locked within inside of it. Because Christos could be it's a whole other thing too, to where it's said that Christos is actually, it's a whole other thing. That I'm gonna stop myself on that and just I'm gonna talk about that at a different time. But she actually displayed this, like she actually fully encompassed it. She actually knew what this was. She fully understood his teachings, and she was the only one. That's why she's so central to this. And again, Gnostics, literally, these are just the texts are not included. These are not normal ones. This is a separate branch. There's the Gnostic, there's actually even a couple different versions of the Gnostic church, because there's the Orthodox Gnostic church. There's a couple different ones. But so the Gospel of Mary is found in the Berlin Codex, which was discovered in the late 19th century in Upper Egypt. And it was actually incredibly well preserved, but like I said, we do have pieces of it missing. We do have bits and pieces of it that's not fully there. So some of it is, like I said, they had to fill in holes, they had to do a little bit of interpretation and things like that. But it really talks about how she was able to have this super mystic vision, and she was able to understand all the knowledge in the heavenly realms, and she was really actually portrayed as the leader of those teachings, and she was there actually not just like as some as the Catholic Church would like to paint her as a healed prostitute just following after Jesus like a lost little puppy and just wanting to serve him. Like she was actually there, like comforting and guiding him and comforting and guiding the apostles. And that she was very much a part of the teaching and the learning and even teaching herself and all of that. Like this is the story that it all tells about her, about who she is, and that they both understood and they knew exactly the story of what was going to happen to Jesus and him dying, but they knew how important it was and the roles that they both had to play in it. And it's just that's really what you see in this text. It's really what you start to hear, and this is really how you start to feel about her and how you start to see how he feels about her. He's in these texts, he talks about her in a very loving way. He regards her in a very loving way. They're very compassionate towards each other. They're very comforting towards each other. And it talks about as well how they both, and how she especially was able to completely disembody her soul to be able to achieve gnosis, to be able to be a part of it as fast as, to be able to be sitting in gnosis with him, and to be able to understand all the mysteries of the universe and all the mysteries that there was that needed to be understood, that she was able to do that with him. So that is that. That's when it comes to that text. We also have the Gospel of Mary, which is separate from the Gnostic versions as well, may I add. And it's so interesting. It's just so interesting. She pops, it's such a tiny piece of paper that we have for this Gospel of Mary, this one that we have, and it's just so tiny, and it pretty much just referenced her as his wife. That's literally all it is. But again, there's so much to her. Okay, so I gave you a breakdown of what is in that text, how she's portrayed and how she's talked about in the study guide, starting on page, I want to make sure you have the exact page, 18. I have the exact text. Like I literally took my PDF and I made sure that I typed it out exactly over. It wouldn't let me copy. It made me really mad. But I have it over for you. I have the interpretations that we've had to add just because, again, we don't have all of it. But because we have that, you can see that in there. You can read all of it. This also is where it talks about as well in this text and in this story. I mentioned it before about the relationship between her and Peter. It's talked about too, about how Peter's pretty envious of her, and how Peter really actually ends up growing very hostile towards her. He doesn't like that Jesus is placing her above him. Doesn't like that he talks about her knowing more than him and being able to achieve gnosis more than him. He actually they'd come in actually complete direct conflict of each other, Peter and Mary, which personally, like this story and this text, the reason why you hear that is a big reason why I feel like she ends up later like so vilified by the Catholic Church, and why she gets rewritten as a prostitute and so sinful is because who's the first pope? Peter. So granted, he wasn't the pope that did it, but like if there's so many writings and stories about how much like Peter and Mary Magdalene didn't get along, it would make sense that eventually somewhere down the road somebody's gonna be like, in his honor, I'm gonna fix this. So that's, yeah, so I think it's just really interesting when you see that and you read that, because again, I think it foretells what's going to happen to her because of the Catholic Church and because of the Roman Catholic Church. In the study guide, I have quite a few different versions that you can go find and get access to the Gospel of the Mary Magdalene. Like I said, I have a text there. I have different interpretations, this one, the one that is by Christopher Richardson, it has everything that I put in there, but then it also has his interpretations. It talks about all the different texts and other things that align to that, and it just brings you a whole collection of the stuff that talks about like who she is and who she was. Because especially in that, she's really painted as the head of the church. And that's where she really should have been, personally. That's really how I feel about it. Okay, so before I go into the talking about her as Jesus's wife and where we have documents about that and where that comes from and how that plays into this, let me just jump back into the chat and see if you guys have any questions. Ooh. Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah. To be honest, honey, I could do a whole class on saints, but it may sound way more like a rant than it may be an actual class, to be perfectly honest on that topic, because even from the Catholicism standpoint and from the text that they built that religion on, it makes absolutely no sense how they built saints into that. I could, yeah, the whole thing. It's a it's a whole thing. They shouldn't even be a thing in Catholicism. It's Peter. Yep. The first Pope Peter, he had some lasting effects. Okay, go ahead, honey.
That actually sounds like a very fun class slash rant. That sounds very fun.
People, do you really actually just want me to do people actually really want to just listen to me ranting about how dumb the Catholic Church is on saints? Like, is that actually something people want to listen to? Okay,
Two
okay,
yeses.
then yeah.
Or three, actually.
Alex wants me to start doing random lives on like random topics I want to talk about, and you know what, I guess this can be one of my rants. Because that's really what it I could go on for so long about this. It makes no okay. Yep, okay, go ahead.
Um, okay, I don't know specific, sorry, I don't know specific verses or that, but I was talking with a friend and he said that one should not, that a, okay, I feel like this is relating, okay? That a devout person should not marry another non-devout person because then their sins will rub off, which sounds very Jehovah's Witnessy. But
Yeah.
but
No.
no, when he told me he referenced something in Corinthians, and I was reading that because I looked it up to talk about it with someone else, and I found a complete opposite of what he said. That I don't remember exactly, but that don't be afraid to marry someone who is not devout because your holiness will rub off on them. Um and something like that made it sound much better than the way he put it, which I'm going to blast him with that when next time we talk. But I was just curious if that kind of plays into if wherever he read that versus what I read, which I believe is NLT, the easy one to read. Um, if that kind of plays into the two different that Jesus was married to Mary versus he wasn't. You see where I'm going with it?
Yes, I see where you're going with that. Yes. Okay. So that's not something that I take from the Bible, but there are many different versions and there are many different sects of Christianity. So it's possible, and it's also possible that that is just how he was taught by somebody in that interpretation of that verse. But I'm gonna look to see. I'm gonna guess it's in First Corinthians. And I have a feeling what chapter it's in. So after this, I'm gonna look and then I'm gonna get back to you on that because I'm gonna dig through. I have so many different versions of the Bible because I'm curious to see if it's just a completely different version and how far back he's reading that. Because that's
Okay.
not any I've never come across that, and that's not an understanding that I've come across. Even in the Gnostics text, I haven't come across that. So I'm really interested to see.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna get this is one I'm gonna get back to you on, honey. I'm
Yeah,
gonna go
yeah,
find
please
the text.
do.
I have a feeling I know what like I said, what chapter it's in.
Yeah. I know he said it was in Corinthians first. I could be mistaken, said the second, and I'm also very paraphrasing that about the sin rubbing off, but that's the gist I got, that is like unhealthy for the devout because then they could be swayed. That's more how he put it.
Yeah, no, I just don't agree with that.
Yeah,
And
I
that
don't
I
either.
don't even think that's a Catholicism thing. That's that. So yeah, I've never come across that. So I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna look into this one because that's not something I've ever come across.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yes, thank you, and definitely get back to me on that when you get time. Also, if for those who don't have every version of the Bible, you can download this app called YouVersion, and it has like a whole bunch of different translations there that you can read. Just FYI for
I'm
those.
gonna say there's quite a few different ones, but I don't know if I use that. If I, yeah, U version. That's a nice one. I like that one. Okay, cool. I didn't know that one existed. That's cool. That's cool. I like that they did that. I wonder how many versions they have on there. I'm gonna check it out after this to see how many actual versions they have on there. Okay. Melissa, I see in the chat. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. So that's a whole other topic for me. Saints and the connection to like African Caribbean religions and Loa, that's a whole other ball game for me than saints and Catholicism. That's completely separate. So yes, I totally, yes. Very, very, very separate concept. And yes. And I have no qualms with the saints and the connection between the African and Caribbean religions and the Loa and any of that. It's Catholicism at its core with saints. That's where my issue is. So I totally understand that and I totally validate that. I totally 100% yes. And thank you for making that point, Melissa. Thank you for putting that in there and referencing that. I really appreciate that. Okay. So I don't see any other questions or comments or hands raised unless I missed one. I'm missing one. Okay.
I'm not sure if she still has a question, but Lindsay Ray had her hand raised.
Okay. If you go ahead then.
I don't want to be off topic, but I was just going to say in regards to the different interpretations, you can find out a lot by looking at who they sit under, like what their pastor teaches them. And that'll tell you a lot about how they're going to be interpreting those Bible verses. Because like there's verses about being unequally yoked and whatnot, but then when you go back to the beginning of Christianity, no one was a Christian yet.
Yep.
But yeah, it's just when you're trying to talk to someone about it, it's always helpful to look at who is teaching them because that's where they're going to get a lot of their beliefs from.
Exactly. Thank you for making that point too, Lindsay, because that's very true. You also have to ask them if they've actually ever picked up a Bible and actually read it, or if they're just going based off of what they were told and spoke to from a pastor too.
Yes. A lot of my opinions changed when I started studying the Bible and the history surrounding it myself instead of just listening to what was being taught. And I
Same
second
here.
yeah. YouVersion is a great resource because you can also compare the verses side by side. And there's actually a ton of versions to pick from. So it's a really great resource.
I did not know that that one existed. So I like that because that's going to make it a lot easier for my life too. I don't have to pull out 7 different books at once. So yeah, thank you for that, Honey and Lindsay, both of you for talking about that because that's really great. Okay, let's see. I know yeah, there are some. Yes, I could do a whole thing on Catholicism alone, to be honest. We'll not, yes, but yes, Morgan, you are very correct. I know, yes. Similar things that I know as well. Okay, so we'll get back in. So talking about Jesus, Mary Magdalene as Jesus's wife. So there actually it's been sitting in the British Library for quite a while. It's a document that we have, and it's literally, some people reference it just as the Mary Scroll. It's just a tiny piece of parchment that we've really come across. It doesn't have a lot on there, but it really just references him, references her as his wife, and I put in all the details about it in the study guide for you to like read it and read actually a lot of it about it. But the reason why I want to talk about this and reference this is because we do have this very, very tiny piece of parchment that does make this statement. When you read in between the lines through the Gnostic text, when you read in between the lines of the biblical text and all the different versions, if you look at how hard the Catholic Church really worked to vilify her and to move her to the place that they put her into, she has importance. She has so much more importance besides what she physically, like what she means. But it's just, sorry, I get really, really, really heated about this one. But this scroll, to sit here and to completely diminish it, to completely put it aside, to completely say that it doesn't matter, just makes no sense. Because when you look at Jesus's life, even from a biblical standpoint, we know nothing of his life at all is historically written. Nothing at all. From when he is a tiny child till he is in his 30s. We don't know anything about his life. We see him once in the Gospel of John when he's 12 years old and he travels to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. Otherwise, we know nothing about him. Even the Gospels, which are written, the earliest one, 65 years after his crucifixion and death. Are you really going to tell me that no one went back and started collecting stories about his childhood, about his time prior to adulthood, how he got his studies, how he even knew how to write, or how he was versed in Hebrew, how he could speak Greek, how he was able to even travel the way that he could? Where did the funds come from for him to be able to move across the lands to do these to be able to perform these miracles? Like, we don't know anything about that. It is literally just poof. We don't know it. It's gone. So when this text surfaced and we started looking at it, when we had this one reference, to dismiss it was just so absurd to me. And it still is absurd to me, people that dismiss this. He specifically references her as her wife. She is his loving wife. Like, she is who he cares about. So this text starts to bring in and pull us into what actually could have been his life and what his actual life was up to his crucifixion. Because again, we don't know much. He just pops up in his 30s. Why would we not? Why would none of those? Why would his disciples not have learned that information? Why would they not have wanted to talk about it? Why would it have not have been included if it weren't for the fact that maybe he was somewhere doing things that they don't want him to talk about, or she was a part of his life much sooner than we realized. And she was way more crucial to changing and shaping who he was, and that they were learning and teaching together. When you look at this, this is really what this brings in. This is really how you can start to look at her and shape her that way. Because in anthropology, culturally, historically, society-wide, it makes no sense for him to be popping up in his 30s and be Jewish and not have a wife. Like, it just makes no sense. Nowhere in the Bible, even in the text in the New Testament, is it anywhere does it say he needs to be celibate, or that he was, or that was a thing. It actually talks about very often how he loved women and women loved him, and that he appreciated them, and he knew how important they were and how valued they should be. I mean, there is a group of 11 women that are almost always around him in the Bible. At least 7. There are often references being around. So this is why this text is so important, is it breaks open this and it starts to deconstruct that. And then you start to get to look at what that connection could have meant and what you're actually really accessing with her. Because there's that theory that she was there and that she was a part of that. Even in with this text, they're talking about the fact that, like, to prove biblically how she could even possibly have been his wife, there are so many hidden messages even in the text of the Bible and the way it was rewritten and how it's been rewritten so many times. There is the story that most people know where he turns the water into the wine and he's at the lake. What's the name of the lake? It's why am I drawing a name on the blank on the name of the lake? For some reason, I want to say I'm gonna have to come back to this because it's gonna drive me nuts. It's not right though. I know it's not Golgotha, that's the hill. I know it's not that. But I'm gonna double check this because I'm gonna double check this afterwards and I'm gonna put it in the chat. But when he's at the lake, and it's literally a wedding, and they talk about how it's John's wedding. Sorry, Old Testament character Joseph. It's Joseph and his wife Asethna. And they actually think that Joseph actually was Jesus, and that Asethna was actually Mary Magdalene, and he just couldn't he couldn't be married. Like, they just didn't want people to know. They wanted to keep their relationship divine and secret. They wanted the relationship to be what it was. They didn't want it to be this big whole thing. Or it's actually theorized that they didn't mean it to be in secret. It actually was written, and it was solely written that that's exactly what happened, and the church changed it. So there's a couple different theories when it comes to that, but it is written in that, like, that text. Like, it in the Bible, we have him actually, like, physically, like, we have in the Bible him at a wedding. Like, he's literally at a wedding. So you can draw the correlations there as well. When we talk about Mary, we also have the cult of Mary, which has a huge history. And it derives around most of these scripts that I'm talking about, most of these sacred texts and most of them actually come out of Egypt. And it talks about, most of the cults have to talk about sexual desire, sexual passion. They talk about success, standing in your own power, divine femininity, all of that. They talk about breaking down all of the walls. They talk about breaking down the walls between the divine masculine and divine feminine, because they created such a brilliant partnership between the two of them, between the divine feminine and the divine masculine. That is really what's harnessed, and that's what's really worshipped there. Is it's really honing in on that divine masculine meeting the divine feminine, and meeting it in such a harmonious way. And then it also has to do with the legend of her getting to part of the legend of her in France and Provence, because it is said that part of the legend is that after Jesus had died, and again, if you believe he actually died, there's some other theories which I'll talk about a little bit later here. Trying to get us through as much of this as I can, because there's so much to Mary Magdalene. But so there's actually a legend that actually revolves to her, and actually that she ascended, which is another reason why she's considered a saint as well in some cases. And this is why she's really attached to the cult of Mary, that she actually left and fled, and she went to Provence, France, aka now France. And that is where she she went and left to France, and she literally actually was so distraught. She was so upset. She was so besides herself. Any other word that you can think of, that's despair and grieving and all of that. And she actually went and she lived in a cave there alone for 30 years. And she lived there, with naked. She wasn't eating any food. She wasn't eating drink. She was never hungry. She was never thirsty. And, she never did any of that. And so she literally just stayed there. And then after 30 years, she came out, she started preaching, she started teaching, and then she went back to the cave and she died. And when she died, angels actually came down and they lifted her up and ascended her up. That's one version of that story. Another version of that story is that she came, she produced the cult, she taught, she did everything that she could to teach and spread his message. She remained celibate her entire life. She could never be with another man. And then eventually one day she just decided that she was done. And so she wandered off into the desert, where she decided that she was going to be alone for 30 years. And she literally just stayed out there wandering. She was never ever hungry, never thirsty. That's always a common thing, by the way. Like, that's common throughout her legend when it comes to her after Jesus. That she was never hungry, she was never thirsty. And then one day while she was roaming out in the desert, these angels showed up, they picked her up, they rejoiced from the heavens, they returned her back to some caves in the rocks, and they literally she stayed there for another 30 years where she lived, and the priests, they took care of her, and then she died. And that is where she's buried and where she's interned, and that is why that is such a holy place. So there's a couple different, like I said, a couple different versions attached to that legend, but that is what the cult of Mary really is all centered around. And because the cult of Mary popped up, that's a big reason why also Pope Gregory the First ended up turning around and turning her into a prostitute and a whore. So how Mary ended up in France, there's a story called the story of the three Marys. And what this story is it is legend that this boat just randomly one day shows up on the southern shores of France. It has no sails, it has no oars, so they don't know how the wind was moving it, but it just shows up, and three women come out. They were all named Mary. And it was Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, and then another Mary. Some claim that Mary is Jesus's daughter. Some claim that it is one of the other Marys that was frequently traveling with him. It's also said that Lazarus was there as well, because Lazarus is said to be Mary Magdalene's brother. And then also a servant from Egypt was there named Sarah. So they showed up and they were there, and they showed up in France, and then they immediately started teaching the truths of Jesus. They started talking about the truths of Jesus, and they were considered, and she was considered the first apostle and disciple. There's a huge church and basilica there for her. Huge. That whole property is considered sacred. Even the cave, and it is actually said that her bones are interned there. There's a lot of claims, though, of where her bones are, by the way. A lot of claims. I don't know if I 100% agree with them having them having her bones either. I'm still actually trying to figure out which one I agree with, but there's a lot of claims to that. So that is her after. That's her after the life of Jesus. So this is where we're looking at it all throughout a bunch of texts. Now, there are some other theories that are out there as well that you're going to hear about, you're going to see about, and that I feel are important for you to work through and decide how you feel about her, so you can figure out how you're going to connect to her energy. Because remember, the reason why I'm going through all of this and talking to you about all these different stories, all the different possible histories, where she's popping up in text, because in order to connect to an energy, you need to truly know who and what that energy is. To do that, you need to know where they came from. So that's why this is always so important to me, to teach you guys all of this, and to teach you as many of the possibilities and as much of the history that I can possibly get my hands on. That's also why I'm considered a mystic, because I feel like this is how you find the right answers. This is how you can find your right answers for your sacred contracts. So other theories about her. I'm going to be perfectly honest. A lot of these are things that I wholeheartedly believe and agree with. Some people are like, this is way out there, but they have a lot of merit. And there's a lot of very, very, very educated scholars and historians and anthropologists that have worked really hard to put a lot of this information together. It's not coming from just some like random conspiracy theories. All of this stuff, there's legit documentation to back it up. And I have my sources cited also here and in the website. Like, you can always look at it, and you can always ask me for more too if you want to know about it. So one of the popular theories that you're going to talk about is that Mary was actually the head of the church, the true prophet, and the true teacher. It actually wasn't Jesus at all. He actually wasn't doing any of the teachings. He wasn't teaching anything. He was not doing any of the sermons. He did not perform any of the miracles. He didn't do any of that. It's actually thought and theorized that Mary did. Mary was actually said to be the head of the church. Mary was the one that was actually teaching everything. She was the one that had the access to the knowledge of the message. She's the one that taught Jesus, because in a lot of the text, she's quite a bit older than him. And because there's thoughts of her, and we have some texts of her being attached to occult studies and mystery schools in Egypt and in other regions, that she actually was the one that was teaching, performing the miracles, and doing all of the work, and that he was her pupil and her disciple, but he took on the public face to make sure that she was safe, because in that day and time, like, a woman could not, like, could you imagine like what would have happened, like, if she tried saying and doing the things that Jesus was doing, even with the reaction that he got? So that's actually a very, like, it's got quite a bit of merit to it, when you look at quite a few of the different documentations and their travels, and if you look at how they speak to each other within all the different versions of stories and things like that. And also, like I said, that age difference, and her family, and the fact that historically we can place her a lot better than we can Jesus as well. So there's a lot of theories that, like, she's the one that funded a lot of it, that she's the one that was able to have him get his teachings, and she is the one that funded the travels, and she was the one that was able to do that. Another plausible theory that's coming up a lot that I've run into very frequently, it's pretty solid, and it makes kind of sense as well, is that Jesus actually didn't die. Jesus never actually died on the cross. He actually was either literally almost to the brink of death and still suffering and pain. And when they took him out, like she was able to, nurse him back to health through different ways and different methods. Otherwise, a very, very prominent theory that's coming up with this is because she's studied in mystery schools, because she's attached to the divine feminine, because there's quite a few paintings where you see on churches, especially in stained glass, that are dedicated to Mary Magdalene. The artwork actually pictures a full moon, and it actually pictures it being at night when it comes to Jesus's crucifixion and him being removed from the cross, which in Jewish tradition, like you don't do that. Like you don't do anything with the body after sun, like that's not something, you don't do that. So it makes it paint more like it was more of a secretive thing, not something that they went up to Pontius Pilate and asked to do, that they did it, kind of more without permission and stole away his body, to have it then, interned and buried in the tomb for 3 days. So with this and with that information popping up, another theory with her is that she actually stopped his death with an herb in some way, shape, or form, or a tonic, or any type of some type of incantation or spell, some type of form. She made it appear like his heart had stopped and that he had died, but he actually hadn't. And then that 3 days in the tomb was him being able to recuperate, whatever it was with the herbs or tonics or whatever it was. And then they were able to run off and flee away together. There actually is solid documentation of her arriving in a couple of different areas, not just France, with a man with her. There's also a solid theory that the Mary that is unnamed in the story of the three Marys is just him. And he's just, looking more feminine. Because of that, and with that, there's actually like possibly them at a grave site in a castle in Cathar. There's also possibly a grave site for them in another castle in Masada, as well, and that they both lived to be like 80 years old. And there's solid documentation that they were actually there at the last stand for the Jews before the Romans took over, and they were actually at that battle. They were just fairly old. So there's quite a few documentation, like I said, that can back this up and be about this. And then we talked about it also before a little bit, is another theory is that Mary was actually the Holy Grail in a couple different senses. Like I had talked about before, that she was the one that was actually maybe able to help him fully enlighten, fully find balance, fully experience the full human experience, so that he can do what was needed of him to do for humanity, and for his divinity. It's also said because she's the Holy Grail, because she was the one that was able to carry on his bloodline and have children, and that, she made it to where he's still walking the earth to this day in a physical sense and form. So that's also another theory that's surrounded and attached to her. Okay, so before we go into correspondences and how to work with her, I'm going to jump into the chat and see what questions you guys have. I know there's going to be some. Native or not native is super interesting. That's I agree, Morgan. That's also why I look at it and why I always find it so interesting that it's common across all of every time that I look at her, like all the different legends with that story, like it's common that she was just wandering around, not eating and not drinking. So it's actually super, so I find that super interesting too. That's a huge reason why I find it super interesting. It's because yes, that food and it's very crucial and very key parts of that religion. Okay, go ahead, honey.
What's the age difference?
What?
What's the age difference?
Depending on who you ask, it's about a 20-year difference.
Okay. And you said that one can trace her roots in history better than his?
Yes.
Okay, and
also you have to remember it depends on which name you're looking at, because some people look at her as possibly being Mary of Bethany, and then there's Mary of Magdala. So there's both those versions, but both of those can be traced historically very far back.
okay. And was the story of Jesus's birth, did that come out before, um, like before he rose to popularity or after? Or like during the same time?
It wasn't written until the Gospels were written, which is 65 years after his crucifixion.
Okay.
So that story, yeah, it wasn't written down, it wasn't part of anything, it wasn't written down in the text until the Gospels were written, which was 65. The first one was 65 years after he died, and then Luke and John both respectively came 15 and 20 years after.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay. Whew. Okay. So correspondences. I'm pretty sure. Have all of you been in my class before? Let me just double check. Yeah, all of you guys have been in my class before. So correspondences that you can use to work with her. To be perfectly honest, there's not as many with ascended masters as there are with deities. I have found that personally. I've found that from other practitioners as well. I think the main reason is because when you're working with ascended masters, a lot of times you're going to be working more with the rays of light. And you're going to be working with them more in like a protection energy sense, like adding them to your spells, your rituals, and in a meditative state as well. A lot of times is when you're going to be working with them. So correspondences, yeah, they help you connect that archetype energy. Like I talked about in my archetype class, my archetype study guide, but they're not they're not as crucial as they are for deities because it's not seen as like an offering. It's not seen as like something as like a give and take. It's just a way to try. It's a way to it's really, really more of a way to connect you directly to that energy. You do that the same way with deities. Yes, it's an energy connection, but that offering aspect makes it a little bit different. If that's confusing at all, when I come out, you guys can ask me a question, but I hope that clears that up just a little bit, why there's not quite as much and why not quite as important when it comes to Sunday Masters. But again, you can still use them and you still have them. So crystals that you can use, carnelian, that's a number one that I've had the best luck with, and I've talked from other people and that I've been taught. It's very, very sacred with her. It's very much about empowering and persistence. And it works with a lot of different goddesses as well. And Mary Magdalene archetype energy seems to complement very well with other goddesses, I've also found. And other practitioners have said this as well, which is why I feel like carnelian just works really well. And because it is a very, that's a very powerful sacred stone. Like it is very set in power and it's very supportive in that. Rose quartz will also help because she's like that very loving faithfulness. Red jasper for the same reason of the power and the sexual power specifically. Lapis lazuli because she will connect to the divine feminine and the regency of lapis lazuli. And then also because that's when you're working with her in the 7 rays of light, the blue light's going to be the one that's going to really, really harness her and that you're going to want to work with her with. I have heard some people working with her with the red light, but the blue light, that's really where she calls and where she really sits in. So any red and blue crystals will work with her as well, but those are going to be the main key ones. Herbs are roses and rosemary. Seem to work with her really, really well. And then colors are going to be blue, red, and white. When it comes to anything else that you can think of that you want as a correspondence or to try to help you be grounded and centered when you're going into a meditative session to meet her and work with her, is anything that's going to help you connect to your heart, your root, or your throat chakras. Very specifically, though, that heart and that root chakra. The throat chakras, though, I like including that whenever you're dealing with empowerment or whenever you're dealing with power on your own or persistence, because you need your throat chakra open and you need it harnessed in order to actually stand in your power. Because you need to be willing to verbalize that. So that's a big reason why I include that one. When it comes to oils, you can use any type of rose oil, lavender oil. I really like primrose, really for her. And then I do have quite a bit of luck with anything that has jasmine and lavender as well. Just because of how the divine feminine is connected to that. When it comes to working with her, she really, really embodies a lot of what I love and a lot of what I need and a lot of what I really hope to experience, which is why I've really latched onto her in the last year. She's really opened up a lot for me outside of deity work, because sometimes I don't have the energy for the deity work. So to be able to work with her and call in her in the ascended master work, and also she breaks down so many walls in society today, because we can't get away from how much Christianity influences us. To work with her and break down those walls of Christianity with her, there's another level of empowerment on a society level within yourself when you're working with her, and it really helps bring it in. I don't want to use the word rebellious, but it almost feels like the best word for that, because it makes you feel like, oh yeah, just almost kind of rebellious against the dogma that's usually surrounded with her and everything that's around you with society, and how you can't get away from it, no matter how hard you try. So she's really great for that. She really embodies the divine feminine. She's a great teacher for deep mystical wisdom, because she's got a lot of attachment to occult studies and mystery studies and things like that. I've had some pretty big like breakthroughs where I've used and I've called her just for spell work, and she's pointed out some things to me. I'm like, hold up, wait, I did not think about it from that perspective. Thank you, because there may have been some like bias that I was putting in that I was just blocking out because of what and who she can be attached to. She also is really great for communication between the worlds, especially the divinity and through here. And she's really great with faithfulness in yourself and in others, and in your divine connection in your divine feminine, your divine masculine. She's really great with making sure that you very fully and enthusiastically like live your life, not just your life, but your sacred contract and purpose the way that you're meant to. Because she really just harnesses that. And she really can help with a lot of your divine feminine and sacred feminine work. She's really great with that. How you can start working with her, like with any deities, and like I talked about in the Ascended Masters overview, shadow work, womb healing, yoni work. Now that I've talked about sex magic, you guys know how to use some sex magic to try to connect with her as well, and try to help with a lot of that shadow work, that meditation, that yoni work, and that healing. I have all my study guides here if you need them, and then if you don't need to go anywhere as well. You can also call on her through meditation. I did put some meditations in here, some guided meditations in here. There's some great songs that are connected to her. So through you can do meditation with guided meditation or on your own to reach out to her. Again, typically try to make sure that you're visualing blue light when you're doing this, or you have some type of red stone or anything like that with you. You can enter the Akashic records to start finding out more information about her and your connection to her. You can add her to your existing altar, or you can create an altar for her all on your own. Personally, she's got her own mini altar for me. I wanted her separate until I felt like she could be fully integrated for me. Because she is a new energy that I'm working with. So when I'm working with somebody and I'm really deeply invested in working with that energy, whether it's an ascended master, an archetype energy, or I like to make them feel special, and I like to let them know that like I am very much like I'm focused on you right now. So when I feel like she's ready to join everybody else, she'll get moved to that altar. But you can create one for herself, or you can add her to yours. It's all going to depend on your practice and how you feel that energy connection with her. You can create talismans that have to do directly to her and have them with you. You can have sigils that have to do with her and have them with you and on you. I have one that I usually put like on the bottom of my ankle that actually has to do with it, that breaks, that it will activate if I break it. And I use it when I really need to like I really need to stand in like my faithfulness of who I am, and like what I know that I am meant to do and what I'm meant to teach like on this earth. So like I have one actually for her, like the sigil that works really well for her. That's great. So you can do that as well. Other ways that you can work with her is specifically something called rose alchemy. This is a specific practice that has come up from a couple different temples that are directly related to her. It's a way that you awaken a specific light code while working with the 7 rays of light. It helps you. You're also working with the moon. You're doing a bunch of manifestation work. It's a lot of sexual rites. It's a lot of things. It rose alchemy. It's a lot of things. It's a very high frequency consciousness. It's all about, divine feminine sacredness. And it's intense. It is intense. It pulls on stuff from Atlantis and Egypt, and it pulls on some from the cult of Rosa Mystica. It pulls from a lot of stuff. It's all about balance and harmony and healing, and really, really weaving the masculine and feminine together on a very high frequency to uplift all of the human consciousness and the collective consciousness. It's fabulous. I have links in here for you to take a look at. It's a very, like I said, it's a very specific practice, but it is fabulous. So that's another way that you can work with her. Another way, the next way is going to be working with the 7 rays of light. I talked about this in the Ascended Masters overview class. If you didn't see that class, go watch that. It's going to be, I do it in pretty detail there so that you can understand it in a lot more detail. But if you're going to work with her in the 7 rays of light, you're going to want to work with her in the 2nd ray, which is blue. It represents love and compassion and kindness and understanding. She really embodies that. Like I said, I have known people that work with her in red because it represents will and power and force and embodiment. But she really, really encompasses the very guiding, loving, compassionate, kindness, faithfulness. Like she really represents all of that. And I personally feel like she sits really well in the blue. But again, she may sit somewhere else for you. This is going to be also your personal practice. Everybody's going to have different ascended masters within the different rays of lights if you choose to work with the lights. So also make sure that you're looking at that. Make sure you're doing the shadow work. Make sure you're doing the reflective inner work to figure out if she's sitting where you think that she needs to be sitting. Some people I could also see putting her in indigo because of, dedication and spirituality and religion and being attached to all of that. I mean, if you look at her as the first apostle and disciple spreading Christianity, it makes perfect sense for her to be there. So again, take a look at that. Decide where you want to put her, where you want to place her, where she's resonating with you. It's not going to be wrong. That's what's brilliant about this path. You can experiment a little bit and figure it out. And you may have a different answer than I do because she may come to you differently, just like with the deities. Another way, and I think it's the last one that I really have in here, is anointing. And doing a sacred anointment with yourself, or you can even do it with your partner, even if you really wanted to. I personally haven't done that. But I don't see why you couldn't, because she is so pivotal in the story of, the resurrection, and she is the one there anointing, preparing them. That's a very, very sacred act. It is a very, very important act. It is an act done very much out of deep, deep love. So to do an anointing act, to honor that connection that she has, to honor that act of service that she did, and that was important and sacred to her, is a way to connect to her. And you can anoint yourself. You can definitely anoint yourself. I do it often. You can use oils, the rose, lavender, jasmine, any those you can. If there's something else that calls you better, it's not going to be wrong. Those will connect to her. You want to make sure you consecrate the oil, you charge the oil, you bless the oil, and then you anoint yourself. You can do it by doing actual sigils and symbols. You can simply just lather it on your body, but you make sure that you're doing it in a very meditative, very sacred space. You're making sure that you have that intention of that blessing that you put into that oil while you are anointing that body. You are doing it in a very loving, a very compassionate way with your body. And that is a great way to be able to connect to her. You're also connecting to yourself in that way. I do have a tarot card spread in there for you to look at as well when it comes to her. And then, like I said, I've got oodles of pages of resources in here for you of so many different books, so many different ways to work with her. I didn't even cover all the different ways, all the different paths, all the different temples that there are that attach to her. So definitely just take a look at it. Definitely ponder it. Definitely look at who she is. Look at the text. Figure out how you feel about her. Okay. I'm gonna jump in the chat, see if you guys have any questions. Go ahead, honey.
Now a question just to FYI. There's no oils listed in the study guide under the correspondences.
There's not. Okay, I will fix that after this and update it on the website since this one should. Okay, I will fix that. Thank you.
No
That
problem.
was probably when my son came in here yelling and interrupting me last night. So I will fix that. Okay, oils. Do I at least have it written underneath the anointing section though?
Yeah, you do.
Okay, so at least it's there. Okay.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah,
will
you
add it
have.
underneath correspondences too after this. Okay. Fabulous. Okay. Any other questions or anything else? Comments or anything? Okay, so before the next question comes that I know is gonna come, we're pretty much at 4 o'clock. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty exhausted. I don't think I could call somebody in right now if I wanted to. Do we have a class on Monday night at all right now? Does anybody know? Because I am meeting with a student Monday night, but before or after, I could pop on and I could call her in if there's not a class. Let me see if.
I
No
just
class,
checked.
only in the afternoon.
Okay,
Oh, sorry.
so I will do that. I will schedule time Monday night, either before or after, because like I said, I am meeting with a student that night. And I will come in and I'll do that. It'll take probably about 30-45 minutes. Just because I want to make sure you guys really feel that energy. But we will do that then. Because yeah, there's just a lot to go over with her, and I feel like I even rush, to be perfectly honest. So if everybody's okay with that, because again, I really don't want to call in if I'm not feeling 100% to do that. And I hope I'm not disappointing anybody either. Okay. Any questions, any comments, anything that you guys want to talk about that we discussed?
I just want to say, better for you to take care of yourself than to
Yes.
appease us with this.
I agree. Okay. Hopefully I did this justice. Hopefully, I know I probably left you with way more questions than what you had coming into this, because this is a lot and there's so much to break down, even when it comes to Christianity alone. And trying to pull out the pagan nuggets out of it. So hopefully it was great. And hopefully you guys enjoyed it. So, and again, thank you for the patience with technical difficulties, and I'll figure out how to do the Facebook Live and the public page, the next one. So, okay. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good rest of your day. And Monday, I will put it on the schedule. I will get it on the schedule once I figure out what time's going to work. So, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Ooh, it's hot.